My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 34 years old, and I live alone in a modest studio apartment tucked above a bookstore on the edge of South Minneapolis. It's the kind of place with creaky floorboards, unreliable heat, and windows that whistle in the wind. I've been here 5 years, long enough to memorize every groan in the pipes and every spot where the afternoon light hits the worn hardwood floor just right. On that November morning, the sky hung heavy, the kind of gray that promised snow but never quite delivered. I had the day off work, a rare Thursday, with no shipments, no inventory, no rush orders. I curled up on the armchair by the window, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, flipping through a tattered vintage magazine I picked up for 50 cents at the thrift store downstairs. There was a comfort in the quiet, a stillness I rarely let myself enjoy. And then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Dad. I stared at it for a moment, heart tugging with something complicated, an ache that wasn't quite fear, but far from comfort. We didn't speak often anymore, and when we did, it usually meant something needed fixing. I tapped the speaker button and set the phone on the side table. Claire. My father's voice crackled through a little too upbeat for what came next. You don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year. I blinked. I'm sorry. What he exhaled like he'd been rehearsing this. We just think it might be easier if you stayed in the city this time. You know, to keep things calm. Lizzie's been having a hard time again. There it was. Lizzie, my younger sister, the center of every orbit whether she asked for it or not. And by having a hard time, Dad usually meant she'd had a meltdown or another falling out with a coworker or a creative crisis that required absolute silence and no perceived criticism. Thanksgiving apparently was now too much for her fragile world. So, I'm not invited, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, because Lizzie gets nervous when I'm around. No, he rushed. It's not like that. We just don't want her to feel overwhelmed. You know how she gets. I stood setting my tea down carefully, overwhelmed by what exactly the person who paid the heating bill in January or the one who fixed the plumbing leak in March when she decided to flush dried flowers down the guest toilet because they smelled like dead dreams. His sigh came like clockwork, that deep, weary exhale that said I was being difficult again. It's just one holiday, Claire. You'll be fine. I stared out the window. Snowflakes had started drifting down, small and uncertain. One holiday. After I covered the roof repairs this summer, after I sent almost $5,000 to keep the lights on over there since January, Claire, don't make this about money, but it is about money, I said louder than I meant to. It's always about money, except when it's about Lizzie's peace. Silence. And then softly, family is complicated. So is being the one who holds it all together while you pretend I'm not in the room. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call and stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it face down on the table. The tea had gone cold. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. I knew exactly where to go. My Excel spreadsheet titled House Transfers, color-coded by year and purpose, $4,730 this year alone. Heating oil, electric, broken sump pump, groceries during Dad's unemployment stretch. Emergency money when Lizzie forgot she had to pay rent on the studio she shared with her ex-boyfriend turned astrology consultant. None of it was required, but all of it was expected. I pulled up the utility portal. The heating contract for 142 Bay Ridge Street. The house I grew up in was still under my name. I'd set it up that way when Mom called crying one February, saying the pipes might freeze. I was the one who sat on hold with the oil company, who paid in advance, who made sure the house stayed warm, while Lizzie recorded sad songs in the attic. The cursor blinked over the cancel autopay button. I hovered, then clicked. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure you want to stop recurring service?" I clicked, "Yes." Confirmation appeared. Service will end November 2nd. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, not with guilt, but with clarity. Let them feel the cold. Let them figure it out. I had carried the warmth long enough. That night, as snow dusted the balcony and the radiator groaned beside me, I pulled out the Thanksgiving photo from 2018. It was the last time we'd all been together without tension. I was between jobs back then, working a temp shift at a call center, barely affording rent, but I still showed up with pumpkin pie and wine I couldn't afford. Lizzie had shown up late, cried during grace, and left halfway through the meal because someone mentioned her ex. Everyone comforted her. No one asked if I got home safe. I tucked the photo away in a drawer and went to bed with a strange sensation in my chest, not bitterness, not relief, just space. The next morning, I woke up to the kind of quiet that used to feel like loneliness, but now felt earned. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a thick cardigan, and watched the sky lighten over the street. Minneapolis had turned white overnight. No messages, no missed calls. And for once, I didn't wonder if that meant something was wrong. Because this time, I wasn't waiting to be needed. This time, I was finally choosing myself. The morning after the phone call, Claire woke before her alarm. Her body felt heavy, like it had absorbed the cold that clung to the window panes overnight. She lay there for a moment, cocooned under the comforter, her eyes fixed on the ceiling fan that hadn't spun since August. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Not peaceful, not yet. Just hollow. Outside, Minneapolis had finally committed to winter. Snow had fallen overnight, dusting rooftops and fire escapes in a thin coat of white. The street below was nearly silent except for the scrape of a shovel somewhere far off and the hum of a city reluctantly waking up. Claire sat up slowly, pulling on the same hoodie she'd worn the night before. She didn't bother with the lights. The gray sky lit the apartment in a soft, muted glow, almost like a stage right before the actors come on. She padded into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. The warmth of the machine filled the air with a low hum competing with the silence in her chest. She tried not to glance at her phone on the counter, but of course she did. No messages, no missed calls, not that she expected any. Still, it ached a little. She poured herself a cup and wrapped both hands around it, standing by the small window that overlooked the alley. Trash bins, a dusting of snow someone's broken umbrella left behind months ago. She thought about her father's words again, "You don't need to come home for Thanksgiving," and the sharp finality of her own, "Then don't expect another dime." The thing was, she'd meant it. Every syllable. But now came the part after the line had been drawn where the silence grew legs and wandered around the apartment like a presence. By mid-morning, Claire had opened her laptop and logged into the utility account again, just to make sure. The cancellation had gone through. November the 2nd, 4 days from now. The heat in their house would taper off slowly like a ghost easing out of the walls. She thought about texting her mom, something vague, something that could maybe ease the fallout. But then she remembered how her mother's voice had stayed quiet during that call, how she hadn't objected, hadn't even cleared her throat. Just silence, letting Claire twist in her own outrage, while Lizzie's fragility was shielded like it was sacred. Claire closed the laptop and walked into the living room. Her eyes landed on the photo again, Thanksgiving 2019. She almost turned it down like she had the night before, but she didn't. Instead, she walked over and picked it up. She looked at her own face, wide smile, eyes tired. Standing between her parents, Lizzie just off frame, already crying about something that no one remembers. I was there, she thought. I always showed up, but presence didn't mean belonging. Not in that house. She set the photo back down and reached for her journal, the one she'd been neglecting for weeks. On the first blank page, she wrote, "Just because I held the roof up doesn't mean they ever saw me as part of the house." After lunch, she layered up and went for a walk, boots crunching over snow that had started to pack underfoot. Powderhorn Park stretched ahead quiet, except for the occasional jogger and a father pulling a sled with a child who shrieked with joy every time the path curved. Claire watched them pass, wondering what that kind of family sounded like inside 4 walls. She sat on a bench for a long time, her breath visible, her fingers stiff, even inside wool gloves. Her mind looped old conversations with her father like cassette tape rewinds calls about bills repairs, just a small favor. There had never been a question of if she could help, only when and how much, and she always did, quietly, quickly, like an unspoken pact. But now there was no pact. Just 4 more days until the house cooled down enough for them to feel what she'd felt all these years unnecessary. Back home, she found herself standing in front of her closet, rummaging through the back shelf for the wool blanket her aunt had given her in college. She pulled it out, shook the dust off, and draped it over the couch. It was an act so small, so simple, but it felt like something new, something of her own. She lit a cinnamon-scented candle and let the room grow warm in its glow. Then, with another mug of tea in hand, she pulled out her budget spreadsheet and stared at the section labeled Family Contributions. She deleted the entire column. Just like that, months of numbers vanished into white space. The cursor blinked at her, daring her to regret it. She didn't. As the sky darkened and snow picked up again outside, Claire sat on the floor beside her space heater and leaned her back against the wall. Her phone buzzed once. A text. From Lizzie. Real mature. That was it. No greeting, no context. Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she typed a new line in her journal, "Maturity isn't silence. It's knowing when not to speak." She closed the notebook and leaned her head back. The heater buzzed, the candle flickered, and outside the storm carried on. But inside, for the first time, she felt still. The snow had only gotten heavier overnight, blanketing the sidewalks in white silence. I watched from my kitchen window as a neighbor across the street struggled to start his car, the engine coughing like an old smoker before it gave up entirely. I sipped my coffee slowly, the mug warming my hands, but my chest felt hollow. It had been 3 days since the call from Dad, 3 days since he told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. 3 days of me replaying the conversation like an old broken cassette click rewind repeat. And each time I heard it in my head, it stung just the same. I wasn't invited not because I had done anything wrong, but because Lizzie might get upset. That was the deciding factor. My sister's peace over my presence. Again, I didn't go to work that morning. Instead, I wrapped myself in my thick cardigan, the navy blue one I always kept at the back of the closet for comfort, and opened the folder I kept under the bed bills, receipts, transaction records. Every time I'd helped them. Every time I bailed the house out of another hole. Over $5,000 in the past 18 months, all tracked down to the cent. I flipped through the pages until I found the one I wanted, September 14th. $600, emergency oil refill. Lizzie's podcast fund accidentally used the original. I stared at the note, the little quotation marks around the word accidentally making my stomach tighten. I remembered the text she'd sent back then. Sorry. I'll totally pay you back when I monetize next month. Of course she didn't. She never did. I shut the folder, slid it back under the bed, and sat there on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, forehead resting against them. For a moment, the only sound in the apartment was the soft hum of the radiator working to fight off the Minneapolis cold. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother, short, vague, guilt-laced, like always, "Hope you're staying warm, sweetie." I didn't respond. What was there to say? That her silence on that call hurt more than the words themselves, that not one person on the other end of the line had said, "But Claire deserves to be here too." Instead of spiraling, I put on boots, grabbed my coat, and walked to the local co-op a few blocks down. The cold slapped me awake with every gust of wind. At the store, I bought a loaf of sourdough bread, a wedge of sharp cheddar, and 3 Honeycrisp apples. The cashier gave me a smile and said, "Cozy day in, huh?" I nodded, trying to return the smile. Back home, I made grilled cheese and apple slices, lit my old cinnamon candle, and curled up on the couch with a blanket and a book I'd been meaning to finish for weeks. For a little while it worked. I felt okay, not happy, not healed, but grounded. Then around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Lizzie. "Did you really cancel the heating account?" Just 6 words. No hi, no punctuation. No acknowledgement of anything beyond her own discomfort. I stared at the screen, the anger rising so fast I felt my fingertips go cold. I had in fact canceled the auto payments for their oil service 2 days ago. It was the first time in years I'd done something for myself without announcing it or apologizing. It wasn't even out of malice. It was survival. Boundaries finally drawn. I typed out a dozen replies and deleted them all. Finally, I just powered off the phone and set it on the kitchen counter, face down. The next morning, a voicemail from Dad. "Claire, the house is cold. If this is about money, just say so. No mention of Thanksgiving. No recognition of the hurt he'd caused. Just the usual redirect imply it's financial imply I'm the one being difficult. That's when I realized they didn't see me. Not really. I wasn't Claire the daughter. I was Claire the backup plan. The emergency fund with a voice. The peacekeeper who kept everyone else warm, even if it meant freezing in the process. I spent the rest of the day doing something I hadn't done in years, absolutely nothing for anyone else. I reorganized the pantry. I watched an old Nora Ephron movie on the couch with tea and a heating pad. I even started a new journal and wrote the words in bold across the top of the page, what would it look like if I chose myself? And then I wrote, for an hour. I wrote about the time I loaned Lizzie $200 for her failed jewelry business. About the Christmas I skipped buying new boots to send money home for groceries. About the countless times I sat in my car, hands trembling, wondering if I was heartless for saying no. But now, sitting in my apartment with warm soup on the stove and jazz playing low from the Bluetooth speaker, I didn't feel heartless. I felt whole, still healing, still tender, but whole. That night, as the wind howled and snow swept the streets clean, I slept deeper than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up to another message, this one from Rachel, my cousin, the one who always saw through the mess. Hey, just heard about the heating stuff. I know it's not my place, but I get it. You've carried too much for too long. Proud of you. I stared at the message, and for the first time since the call, I cried. Not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but because someone finally saw me not as the helper, not as the problem, not as an afterthought, just me, Claire. And for once, that felt like enough. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 10 days. Not Mom, not Dad, not Lizzie. The silence, once something that would have unsettled me now, settled into my days like dust on the windowsill, quiet, natural, undisturbed. It was mid-November, and Minneapolis had surrendered completely to the early onset of winter. Each morning, I'd wrap myself in my thickest cardigan, make coffee, and sit by the window watching the city slow beneath the weight of snow. My world had narrowed down to the essentials: warmth, quiet, breath. Then came the message. A text from Mom. Just one line, Claire, the heater's acting up. Can you check with the company? I stared at it, phone balanced in my palm. Not a hello, not an acknowledgement of the call that changed everything. Just a quiet expectation, as if nothing had shifted, as if I hadn't drawn a boundary so firm I could still feel it humming in my bones. I set the phone down without replying. Later that day, I made soup potato and leek, the kind Mom used to make when we were kids, but now it didn't feel like nostalgia, it felt like reclaiming. I sat at my small kitchen table alone, sipping slowly, letting each spoonful remind me that being alone didn't mean being empty. On the 5th day, Lizzie texted, seriously, real mature. No context, no greeting, just that brittle snap of entitlement. The kind that came from someone who'd never had to wonder how the lights stayed on or how the fridge got filled. I didn't answer. Instead, I put on my coat and boots and walked 2 blocks to the used bookstore. I bought a worn copy of a novel about a woman who disappeared from her own life and started over in a cabin in the woods. It felt a little on the nose, but I didn't care. That evening, I curled up in my usual spot by the radiator, reading by the glow of my cheap floor lamp while the wind howled beyond the windows. My phone buzzed again, Dad this time. I let it ring. Then another call. A voicemail. Claire, it's down to 55 degrees in the house. We can't figure out what's going on. If you know anything, call me. His voice sounded tired, a little irritated, not panicked. Still assuming I was just being difficult. Still treating the warmth I once gave as something owed. I deleted the message. 4 more days passed. The snow kept falling. The city carried on. I worked my shifts at the shipping center, sorted packages, clocked out, and walked home in silence. No one asked anything of me at work. No family strings, no emotional blackmail. Just tasks, boxes, cold air breath. I started to like the routine. It was honest. Then on the 11th day, the messages started coming faster. From Mom Claire, it's 48 inside. Dad won't wear a coat. Lizzie's sick. Please. From Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is about family. From Lizzie, you're really doing this, punishing everyone for nothing. Each word felt like a familiar thread trying to weave its way back into my spine. But I'd already unraveled too much to go back. I read them all. I didn't respond. That night I made a list. Not on the laptop this time. On paper. With a pen. I titled it, Things I Gave Without Being Asked. $4,130 in utilities, 3 plumbing emergencies, roof repairs, groceries during Dad's layoffs, covering Lizzie's rent, emotional labor, silence, presence, absence. The list took up a page and a half. By the next morning, the city was under storm warning, wind chill below 0, the kind of freeze that seeped into bones. I wrapped my scarf twice and went to the corner cafe for breakfast, something I never did midweek. I ordered scrambled eggs and French toast and read the paper slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't glance at my phone. When I got home, another voicemail waited. Dad, again. Claire, we sold Mom's old ring to buy space heaters. This is getting ridiculous. Call me. I didn't. I sat in the armchair with my legs folded up and watched the snow coat the fire escapes outside. The ring. The same one she used to wear when baking on Sunday mornings. I felt something flicker in my chest, not guilt, not sadness, just a sharpness, like cold air against the teeth. Then came the knock. A single knock at first, then 2 more. I stood slowly crossing the creaky floorboards and peeked through the peephole. It was Mom. She stood there in her long wool coat, bundled tight cheeks red from the wind. She held a reusable grocery bag, the same one she used when we lived on coupons and sales. I didn't open the door. I just stared through the glass, unsure what the right feeling was supposed to be. Another knock. Softer this time. Claire, she said through the door. It's me. I just want to talk. I opened it not wide, just enough for the heat from my apartment to reach her cold hands. Her eyes searched mine. I'm sorry for showing up like this. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My silence said everything. She clutched the bag tighter. I brought some letters, things I've been writing, about everything. Still, I didn't speak. I stepped aside, not as an invitation, but as permission. She entered like someone crossing a bridge that might collapse. Her eyes scanned the room, the plants on the windowsill, the small candle burning on the table, the folded throw on the couch. It was a life. Mine. Neat. Quiet. Full. It's warm, she said softly. I nodded. It is. She sat, hands trembling slightly, and set the letters on the coffee table. I don't expect anything, she said. Not forgiveness. Not answers. I just needed to show up. She looked tired, more than I remembered. And for the first time in years, I saw her not as Mom, the one who asked me to shrink, but as a woman who had never really figured out how to hold space for both her daughters at once. The moment stretched between us. I didn't say I understood. I didn't say it was okay. I just said, thank you for coming. And somehow that felt like enough for now. When she left, the cold rushed back in for a second before I shut the door. I stood there breathing in the silence. The letters still sat unopened on the coffee table. I wasn't ready to read them, but I didn't throw them away. Instead, I lit another candle, made tea, curled up under my blanket, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the one left outside. I felt like the one who had learned how to build a room where she belonged. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the kind that buzzed with expectation, but the kind that arrives after something has finally settled. The air in my apartment that Sunday morning in December felt still not hollow. For the first time in years, the quiet wasn't asking anything of me. Minneapolis was deep in snow. The streets below lay muffled under a white blanket, and even the buses rolled by slower than usual, their engines growling like tired beasts. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a mug of ginger tea, watching a neighborhood cat leave tentative paw prints across the fire escape. The heater hummed, the radio whispered soft jazz, and I breathed without waiting for a message, a knock, or an apology. They had sold the house. Haley told me in a text just after 9:00 a.m. The "for sale" sign is gone, she wrote. Cash buyer. Closed last night. That was it. No goodbye, no ceremony. Just another American home transferred from one name to another, but this one had carried my labor, my silence, my years of showing up when no one asked me how I got there. I stared at the framed photo on the bookshelf, Lake Superior in winter. Gray skies, frozen water stretching into nowhere, a place that knew how to be still and powerful at the same time. Later that afternoon, I walked into a bakery I'd passed dozens of times and never entered. I bought a pear tart and ate it slowly by the window. There was no celebration, no sadness, just the quiet sweetness of doing something for no one but myself. That night, I lit a candle and opened a blank page in my journal. I didn't write to Lizzie, or Dad, or Mom. I wrote to Claire, to the girl who once thought loyalty meant silence, to the woman who now knew better. You don't need to prove anything, I wrote. You don't need to pay to be included. You were enough before they noticed. You're enough now. I tucked the journal away in the drawer beside my bed next to the utility receipts I no longer needed to keep. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my rhythms. Coffee in the morning, work at the bookstore, quiet dinners, long walks through snow-crusted sidewalks. I didn't wait for anyone to reach out. The phone didn't buzz, but my body no longer flinched at that silence. On the Friday before Christmas, I passed by the bus stop on my day off. I stood there for a few minutes, letting the cold sting my face. Buses came and went. I didn't board. I was just there to feel something sharp and honest. And then I turned around and walked home. Back inside, I opened the window just enough to let in a breath of icy air. It filled the room, quickly pressing into every corner. But I didn't rush to shut it. Some things need to be aired out, fully. That night, I curled up on the couch, the heater rumbling quietly beside me, and opened a novel I had been meaning to read for years. The apartment around me glowed with the kind of warmth that doesn't come from money or approval or family. It came from stillness, from choosing to stay, from not having to leave in order to be seen. Claire Dawson never returned to the room where she was once asked to make herself smaller. She built a new room with fewer walls, better light, and no locked doors. And for the first time, the warmth didn't come from the furnace. It came from her. Claire Dawson never returned to the room where she was once asked to make herself smaller. She didn't leave because she was angry. She left because she was finally tired of disappearing inside her own life, the warmth she had spent years giving to everyone else. She finally learned to keep some for herself. Because love without respect isn't family, and helping without being seen isn't kindness. It's erasure. Some homes are not built with walls and windows. Some are built moment by moment through silence. You no longer apologize for boundaries, you no longer explain, and decisions you no longer ask permission to make. And sometimes choosing yourself isn't loud. It's just still and sacred and long overdue. Have you ever been the one holding everything together until you realized no one was holding you? Have you ever drawn a boundary and felt the cold creep in, only to realize it was the first warmth you gave yourself? Tell us your story in the comments. Because maybe your truth is the light someone else needs to find the courage to step back and begin again. And if Claire's journey echoed something quiet and familiar in your own life, follow the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories. We hold space. For people like you, for people like Claire, for anyone learning to stop apologizing for needing to belong. You're not alone. And this warmth, you deserve it too.